Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up in the back? Okay. Good morning. If you guys can make your way to your seats, the breakfast will continue to be available throughout the presentation, but we just want to get people seated and go ahead and start. I know we had some folks show up at 5:45 and we want to honor your time and make sure that you can get to the opening plenary. So thank you for being here today. My name is Megan DeGiorgio. I am the clinical manager at GOJO, and on behalf of the whole GOJO team, we're delighted to have you with us today for our annual symposium. Today, we're very excited to welcome Rachel Mars and Vera Chu as they share their reflections and insights from a decade of experience with an automated hand hygiene monitoring system. So first up to the podium will be Rachel. She is the Executive Director of Infection Prevention and Control for University of Chicago Medicine Health System, and she has been leading the program as the director since 2018, but has been with the team since 2010. Vera Chu is the Manager of Infection Prevention and Control at University of Chicago Medicine, where she joined the infection prevention team in 2015. Both of these women have been very instrumental in UCM's hand hygiene journey, and they continue the persistent work of sustaining a focus on hand hygiene improvement, which all of us in the room know is not an easy task at all. Before I invite Rachel up to the podium, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. We will definitely share the slide deck with you. That's a common question that we get asked. If you notice on your table, there's a piece of paper with a QR code on it. That QR code is going to be the way that you get your CE certificate and a copy of the slides. So at the end of the presentation, it will flash up on the screen. You can use that paper or you can scan when it's on the screen. That will take you to the SurveyMonkey where you'll fill out your name and email address and all of the ways that we can get a hold of you in order to send the certificate, and the slides will accompany it. So you can expect that 10 to 14 business days after the symposium. Be sure to stay for the question and answers portion of the session. It's always very interesting to hear what they have to say, and they'll be able to answer your specific questions around their hand hygiene journey. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Rachel and Vera. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us, especially early in the morning, so you can hear a little bit more about our 10-year journey with automated hand hygiene monitoring. So we have no relevant financial relationships. The only thing to disclose is our travel expenses were paid to help speak at this symposium. So a little bit about how our journey began. This graph right here displays really our 10-year journey and a nice snapshot. You'll notice when we started in 2015, we were at 32% hand hygiene compliance, which is probably shocking to many of you. But if you have an automated monitoring system, it's probably not all that shocking. We were shocked at the time, but we were able to make some really rapid gains in the first year, get those low-hanging fruit, saw rapid improvement, steadily saw an increase. You'll notice a nice peak in FY20, which we all know what happened in 2020. People were very hesitant and nervous about COVID, and hand hygiene went through the roof. I mean, we had a couple days when we were 100%. And then slowly, over time, hand hygiene decreased a little bit each year. And then now, finally, this year, we're seeing those improvements again. So this is Dr. Landon. She's our Chief Hand Hygiene Champion, and she has really been instrumental, along with our Chief Quality Officer and Chief Medical Officer, in getting people to see the importance of hand hygiene. And really the investment in an automated hand hygiene monitoring system. We all know hand hygiene is really difficult because it's something that people really need to do hundreds of times a day to be able to be doing it well. And anytime there's behavior change, it's difficult, but especially when it's something you're doing hundreds of times a day. But with Dr. Landon and her strong commitment, she never lets us get discouraged, because it's easy to get discouraged. We say hand hygiene is not for the faint of heart, because it really takes a lot of effort to improve. And so she really keeps us in line even when we get discouraged about how important hand hygiene is. All of you are probably very familiar with the impact of HAI, so significant impact on morbidity and mortality, additional length of stay, which leads to capacity and access issues potentially, potentially not being able to serve the community we want because our length of stay is too long, and then non-reimbursement from CMS. Luckily, hand hygiene is settled science. We know it works, and we know it works well. And we have lots of papers and studies to back us up that hand hygiene really is important and really is impactful. And the good thing is there's still some hand hygiene non-believers out there, but luckily we have all this data to support us. And every small incremental improvement in hand hygiene really does have an impact on MDRO transmission and HAI transmission. So the Hawthorne effect is one of the biggest things that we struggle with. You guys have probably all seen graphs like this before, where you have a known observer like the infection preventionist versus a new, a student or someone new that staff don't know. And what you see is when the observer's known, you have about a 2 to 3 times overestimate in hand hygiene. And when you're presenting that data, people don't really see that hand hygiene is a problem, but it really is. And making sure that people really understand the disadvantages of the known observer. It's sometimes difficult, though, because people want to believe they're doing well with hand hygiene, and so sometimes people will want to believe that they're at those 80–90%, because it's easier to believe you're at the 80–90% than really focus on improving hand hygiene. So like we say, with direct observations, all you see is directly what is in front of you. It's just a snapshot of data. Everyone's going to see the data a little bit differently, the opportunities a little bit differently, and it's really difficult to improve with just direct observations, because you cannot change what you cannot measure. And so that's where our journey to automated hand hygiene monitoring really began. So when you're thinking about selecting a system, you really want to try out the technology before you purchase it. I can't stress enough how important it is to do a trial before you just install house-wide. We know that the technology's been validated in a controlled setting, that it works well, and that that's why we would even explore the technology. But we don't know that it's going to work in the real world and in our organization. And so it's definitely important to test it out in your organization, make sure it works for your workflows, your room setups, etc. Another thing is that you really want to talk to others that have the system. They're going to give you so much feedback that's invaluable. They're going to tell you what's been a challenge, what's been a win, things you might want to think about when you try the system, so they're really invaluable as well. You want to seek input from all stakeholders, from frontline to C-suite, to get better buy-in. Really, it's beyond the validating of the system. You want to make sure it works for your team and your workflows. If you install a system that is too difficult for them to do as part of their day-to-day, you're gonna have an uphill battle trying to get people to really use the system. Things you want to think about is, does anyone need to do anything extra to use the system? Do they need to do anything to get credit for hand hygiene? Do they need to pick up a badge? Do they need to return a badge? Anything like that. And really share with them also how important their feedback is, because we can't be out and about on the units all the time, but they are, and often the things that they bring up that are challenges we can solve in real time and get improved. You're definitely going to want to talk to your IT team, make sure that there's no infrastructure issues, and this system's not going to interfere with your Wi-Fi or anything like that. And then you really want to make sure it's going to work in the areas you want to try it. Some systems only really work well in rooms with defined walls and a door versus some systems could work in an open bay. And so you want to make sure that the system that you're looking at is going to work well in the setting you're going to want to try it in. You also want to see if some systems work better in inpatient settings and those workflows versus, say, an emergency department or like a procedural workflow. So there's definitely pros and cons to individual versus group-based monitoring. The good thing is both types of systems do really well with monitoring soap and sanitizer or activations. The difference is group-based monitoring can only monitor at room entry and exit and is going to miss the bed space monitoring. Individual monitoring, you can definitely monitor at room entry and exit, but you can often monitor at bed space as well, which is the ideal. And actually, in our journey, the first system that we trialed was an individual monitoring system. And what we found is it had a really difficult time capturing activity and really attributing the dispense or the activity to the correct person. So some of you will know, like rounds or different settings like that, you'll have a bunch of people grouped around a dispenser. People will be wearing their badges at different places. Some person will be closer to the dispenser, and so they have a really difficult time figuring out which person to give credit for. And so ultimately, well, this was 10 plus years ago, we didn't decide to go with an individual monitoring system because of that. But individual monitoring systems have, as all automated monitoring systems, have greatly improved since that time. So we ultimately went with a group-based monitoring system. We trialed it in 2 units, a pediatric unit and an adult unit, both intensive care units. We incrementally expanded to 38 units, so all the units on one of our campuses. We have about 800 beds monitored and about 3,000 soap and sanitizers monitored. I won't make anyone shout it out, but if you want to jot it down, if anyone has any idea about how many opportunities we capture a day now that we went to an automated system, it will blow your mind. And then you can share after. So when we went to the automated system, we now capture a little bit over 100,000 opportunities a day, each day. So each month, that's about 3.5 million. And before, when we had direct observation alone, we were capturing about 5,000 a month. So 700 times the amount of observations. And the data that we were able to capture from that was so powerful, which Vera will share a lot more about a lot of the process improvement. But with that data, we were able to really look at our opportunities where we weren't before. We were able to go in and look at the data at day shift versus night shift. Were we struggling during lab draw times or when we were rounding or room turnovers? We were also able to empower leaders to go out and look on the unit when hand hygiene was going really well and when hand hygiene was not going well, and look at the differences. And they were able to find a lot of opportunities that way. So how did we get buy-in? That's what we all want to know. How do we get that support we need? So you definitely want to communicate the value of hand hygiene, communicate it to all levels, and communicate it early. Not everyone is going to have the same idea of what is value. You know, your C-suite is probably going to be more focused on money than your frontline staff, but you can try to bring that message to the frontline staff. So talk to them about the money saving and how it could mean that, maybe they can get a couple pieces of equipment that they've really been wanting, or maybe they can get, new staff, and focus on that with them. So as awkward or uncomfortable as it could be, you really do need to share that real data. We don't want to share data that our hand hygiene, when it's an unknown observer, is at 20, 25, 30%. But if you don't actually share that data and that you truly have a problem, no one's going to believe that we need to fix the problem and find a solution. And so you really have to share that data, even though you may not want to. Another thing about sharing direct observation limitations is really important. So sharing that the data you're currently collecting is only a snapshot of data, and because we're not truly measuring the hand hygiene the way we could be, it's going to be near impossible to change that behavior. And the other thing is, for anyone that does direct observations, you all know how much time is spent on direct observations, yet you're not doing anything to improve hand hygiene. And you're going to be able to shift some of that time to actual improvement and behavior change. So when you're talking to the C-suite, you want to be honest and transparent. You want to share that automated hand hygiene monitoring is a very valuable tool that's going to be powerful and get you the data you need to truly make behavior change, but it's not a silver bullet. Installing the system alone is not going to change behavior. What you're going to have is you're going to have a lot of this data that you then can, look for all the opportunities and change behavior, but it's not going to change the behavior alone. Also, we felt it was really important to share that when you install one of these systems, you're honestly probably going to need even more resources than you did prior with direct observation, because you're going to see all this data and see all these opportunities, and you're going to want to fix them all now. You're not going to want to wait, because our ultimate goal is patient safety. And so you're honestly probably going to need a little bit more resources than you normally would prior to installing it, and it's important to make sure that message is shared before. So providers. When we're talking about buy-in for providers, you definitely want to recruit at least one hand hygiene champion, and then get that champion to go recruit other hand hygiene champions. It's nice to have champions from all levels, from trainee to senior attending, because they're going to be the most successful when having conversations with each other. I'm sure we've all experienced that sometimes people are not amenable to reminders around hand hygiene, or hey, you forgot to wash your hands, and having other providers on board that you can go to when people are what we call eye-rolling behavior, when you go to them and they just kind of blow you off. It's really nice to have that peer-to-peer relationship. Another thing is you want to share data. You want to share data about the value of the system. You want to share data about how you plan to validate the system, which Vera will go into a lot more detail, because this group is often one of the groups that questions the data the most. They want to know that it's valid and accurate before they want to buy into the system. You want to go to any forum you can get invited to, grand rounds, section meetings, anything you can to be able to share the message and get buy-in. And even if you can get a few people to buy in, those people can be your advocates, and they can help get buy-in from others. And another thing that we found really successful is to ask for hand hygiene champions when people are rounding. So just having someone on the team when they're rounding as the reminder. It doesn't need to be obstructive. It doesn't need to be a lot. It's just, hey, remember to wash your hands. And then lastly is frontline staff. You want to include them early in the process to make sure that they know how important their feedback and opinion is on the system. We already talked about, we know a lot of these technologies are great and are validated, but it doesn't mean it's going to work well for them and their workflows. And we want to get their real life feedback on how the system's going to work for them. What we found most successful is small sorts of sections of education. You know, don't go present for an hour to them about the new system. You know, go to huddles and staff meetings, have organic conversations in the hallway to try to really get a little bit of buy-in. There's going to be a lot of questions about the system, and honestly, probably a lot more questions after you install the system and they have to be engaged in the system, but to get to those questions early is really going to pay off. And when you're at those sessions and you're trying to educate staff, look for the people that seem eager or super excited about the system. They're going to probably be your early adopters, and they're going to help you spread that message. And so that's really important. And then building trust in the data. Let all the staff know that we're not just going to install the system and say, oh, it must be accurate. We're going to make sure we test it in our environment and make sure it's accurate. And now I'm going to turn it over to Vera, who will talk a little bit how to validate the system.
Would you like your water back? Okay. Hi, everybody. I don't know if this is, can you all hear me? Okay, great, sorry. The sounds are different here. Good morning, thank you for coming. So after you have your C-suite buy-in and installation, you really must objectively validate your system. And we cannot stress enough the importance of validation, because it really is a condition of success when implementing an electronic hand hygiene monitoring system. Sorry, morning, throat's not so good. So at UCM, we thoughtfully planned out our validation to collect as much data as possible. And we knew that we needed to learn like how our system actually functions and behaves within our specific hospital walls, between the pediatric and like adult buildings, and how that system captures data like within our different room configurations as well. So the first part is calibration, and that's just when, you know, the install happens and the install team just makes sure that the data is capturing and that data actually is flowing into your data, the user interfaces. And then the first step is plan path, followed by behavioral validation. And at each step of the way, we found problems and we addressed them before advancing on to the next phase. This process took a lot of IP time and resources, but it is actually, I can't say enough, it's really crucial to collect this data. And to this day, I am still referring back to the information that we've learned during our validation. When people have questions for me, you know, I'm able to answer them with some data that's backed by our studies. So it really does build trust. So the map on your left here is our planned path process. We tested the system walking pathways that simulate perfect world conditions within our building, where one person enters in at a time. You know, I would walk into the room, activate the hand dispenser outside of the room, walk in, make sure that I'm perfectly within the door frame, like straight down the middle, totally robotic. And then I would go and activate the hand hygiene dispenser that's, you know, on the inside the room, and then the soap, and then walk back out straight again. And you're repeating this like 10, 20 times, you know, however many you need to get a good sample size. And of course, my activity is recorded, time-stamped every single time. And then we compare those timestamps to the electronic data and see how closely they match. And during this phase, actually, we actually found that calibration didn't go quite as well, right? And there were things that we need to do to tweak the system. And you work with the vendors, and it adjusts your settings, and so then it's now capturing accurately. Through our plan path, we did learn how quickly our data uploads, because that's a really important thing right now. In a time when everything is real time, you want that data to be right there, ready for you when you need it. And so we actually learned through our planned path that when there's a lot of activity on the units, we're getting real-time data. But when things slow down, maybe on a night shift, we're seeing about a 5 to 10 minute delay. And so this type of information is really valuable and critical when you need to, later on, when you need to look back and try to piece together what. Of course I would get paged right in the middle of this. I'm so sorry. This is just my life. But you all know how that feels as an IP. So we learn about that delay, and then we can factor those in when we're trying to look back at the data again. Oh, that's a great icebreaker. So once planned path has passed, we move on to behavioral validation. And that's the other picture there on your screen. We park ourselves on the unit and just watch every single healthcare worker go in and out of rooms and what they're doing, and without interfering with their workflow. We want to have them as they naturally work, however they work. And of course, all their activities captured by timestamps, right? And we took very, very detailed notes of everything that they'd done. If they entered the room diagonally or zigzag, because some people do that, zigzag into a room, or if they hugged a door frame as they're going in. If they're bringing in their R2s or their computers on wheels, and if they're opening doors, or if they're curtains closing on their way in, and how that data gets recorded, right? And so these notes helped us piece together when we're actually comparing those timestamps to the electronic data that we're seeing and whether those two things matched in the story. I'll be honest, I really hated this part. We all did. It takes so long. It's so long, and it's miserable to sit there for hours a day, when you have other things to do too, but it's really necessary. And at this time also, there's a lot of back and forth with, our team, our install team as well. And it's a great opportunity actually to build a really strong working relationship with the vendor, because, your vendor should want to help you fix the things that you find during validation. No system, and I repeat, no system can come to you pre-programmed with perfect settings for your hospital. I refuse to believe that. There will be adjustments, right, that makes it to fit your settings and your environment. And so we worked really closely with our teams to just tweak our system settings so that they're right for our institution. And to be honest, the vendor should really be as invested as you are in patient safety. This information about, that you're collecting about how your system behaves within your walls, it becomes really good feedback, to help improve existing technology, but also it's useful knowledge when it comes time to analyzing raw data in the future and how you end up designing your initiatives to improve hand hygiene habits and education to your front line. So from validation, we could write a novel on this about what we've learned. Cows, the computer on wheels, they generate heat. And if you have a system that detects entries and exits on infrared, that will add a little bit to your denominator for your entries and exits. And so that will, of course, have an impact a little bit on your accuracy of your data. And so, of course, when we found this during validation, we adjusted the timing of when our stuff captures to account for those things. And just last month, I had someone bring up to me, I think they're counting the cows. And I'm like, they do, but we validated and we've adjusted for those so they don't count. And so I think that that information really comes in handy. Even 10 years now, we're still answering questions from all that we've learned. So it's just nice to have this info to fall back on when you're designing its responses to give to your teams. We learned that people love to hover right underneath the sensor in the doorways when they're chatting or passing things, supplies in and out of their rooms. And this, of course, also contributes to the denominator too. And this is not the system's fault. This is just how people behave, right? This is how your employees behave. And the system is actually giving you now an area where you can actually focus on opportunities for improvement. So back to how miserable this is. We spent thousands of hours doing this, in person, watching people directly, in-person observations, and surveillance footages. And so we've learned a lot about how staff behaves, and we, during validation, we're connecting that picture with our electronic data. And we tried to shoot for 97 to 99% accuracy, or a match, right? And in the beginning of our journey, we got about 97% accuracy, which is really impressive for an electronic monitoring system. But now, in more current times, as we're refreshing our units and reinstalling sensors, we're actually now able to see closer to 99% accuracy in our system. But without validation, you just don't have anything to stand on. Okay, you can go out there, but you really need this data to help support the outreach that you're going to do in the future once the system is installed, and to just have data to back up your responses when you're addressing the frontline teams. And this is really how we found that we built trust with our frontline, is through our validation. So when we were validating, we actually learned that there was quite a bit of noise, right, in the data actually. We saw how much activity EVS contributes, which is about 9% overall, with their daily cleans and their discharge cleans. And then we saw how much a nurse contributes versus a visitor or like a doctor or consultants. And visitors, like family and providers and rounds, they contribute to about 5 to 15% depending on their group. Nurses were actually the ones driving a majority of our entries and exits, 75% exactly. In the ICUs, we found that number was actually even higher because of given the acuity of the patients. And during night shift, it was all nursing. You rarely had EVS going in there. You shouldn't have providers going in there really. So that number was actually higher for us as well. So with that in mind, we determined that our goal that we should set was actually 75% and not 100. 100 is just not a realistic goal given the noise you can get from codes and EVS, visitors going in and out of rooms. And 75, which is a more practical, realistic goal to shoot for. In the end, so even though there is noise in the data, we also knew that there are opportunities for additional hand hygiene events too. Like in the ICUs, there's gonna be more dressing changes, right? And so you're gonna have people clean their hands more often in addition to that one entry and exit into the room. And in your engagement with teams, it's really important to redirect that focus back to redirect it away from the noise in the data and back to things that they can actually control, which is, hey, cleaning your hands before manipulating central lines. And while our institutional goal is 75%, we actually set more reachable goals each fiscal year. So no one jumps to 75% overnight. It's pretty impossible unless there's like major rampant cheating going on. But this year our goal is 58%, and each unit in our facilities actually have their individual unit goals as well each fiscal year. We meet each unit where they are. So our stronger performing units actually have a higher hand hygiene goal for the year, and our less compliant units have a goal that's more reachable within their baseline. And improving hand hygiene is really about changing habits, which is why setting reasonable goals is really important. You just cannot pull a random goal out of thin air, which is why we feel that 100% is just not realistic. And when you do pull random goals out of the air, it just leads to mistrust as well by the frontline staff. And without that trust from the frontline staff, you're not gonna go anywhere with your system. Sustaining goals, this is really, I think, what you all came here to hear probably. So I'm sorry to say, and Rachel kind of touched upon this earlier, having an electronic monitoring system is not going to improve hand hygiene for you. It's just a tool. It will not clean people's hands for you. It's a tool that IPs can use to help collect data, right? A ton of data, and so that the IP can design effective initiatives to improve hand hygiene. So the system shifts the work from direct observation, the time you spend doing that, to giving more time to your IPs to actually work with the frontline staff to improve hand hygiene habits. This is not the same as introducing a central line bundle, not at all. Hand hygiene is about changing habits, and changing habits is really hard. This is in the category of not doom scrolling on Instagram at midnight, which is what I did last night. I'm really tired. Or trying to lose weight. I can't stop eating at just 5 potato chips. I want the whole bag. And it makes me really angry when my doctor says I have to stop eating the whole bag. And so your staff are going to be just as angry when you tell them that they have to clean their hands more when you roll out this electronic monitoring system. And it really is your job to lead these people through these different stages of grief towards the road to acceptance. Well, spoiler alert, it's really exhausting, and the work never ends. But as IPs, I think we all know that feeling anyway. We've tried so many things to engage our team on hand hygiene. We've done 15-minute micro sessions on a unit, short bursts, and hand hygiene champions. Units would designate a hand hygiene champion who's empowered to do just-in-time coaching reminders. They go around, sending out just awareness pages. Their whole job is just hand hygiene for that day or that shift, whatever they're assigned on. And we found that hand hygiene champions, when you have someone who's role modeling that behavior, it's really effective if they take their role seriously. But if they don't, then it's not going to work out. We also did a weekly accountability calls, and they are an absolute must for us. I say they are a must because we did stop them a while ago, and when we stopped them, we saw a stopping of in the improvement of our hand hygiene rates. We have been climbing up. You saw our line graph earlier. We have been climbing up since installation, right? Just steadily improving our hand hygiene compliance over the years, and then COVID came. And so you all know staff are burned out, right? And along with some workforce reductions and workforce disruptions that we've had, our hand hygiene compliance did fall down. So we had paused the calls and then saw that pausing the calls definitely did not help either. And so actually we're bringing back those weekly hand hygiene calls pretty soon, just so that we can provide more support to our units now that we have some more stability. So our IPs each facilitate a call, right, with their own service lines, and the units, the unit managers or a designee chargers perhaps, or a quality champion would come on those calls and they would report their weekly rates. They would also report barriers that they've identified this week, right, struggles that they're facing. And these kind of calls, we noticed, really help keep the units stay motivated. They're also feeling less lonely in their journey because they're hearing other units report the same things, that there's the same struggles that they're facing as well. They're also having this forum now for them where they can hear, units who are stronger performing provide some tips on what initiative that they've performed and they've done that actually helped on their units as well. And so they can take those ideas and bring it back to their unit to implement. One of the things that we've heard as a barrier were codes. When codes happen, you guys know it, all things fly out the window. No one wears PPE, no one cleans their hand. They just run in there and there's blood everywhere, right? And so one of our managers actually, on this call, was like, what I do now is when there's a code, she runs out and she's at the door. She's passing out PPE as they run in and she's just doing verbal reminders, right? And that actually had an impact during those times. And then other units heard that and started adopting those practices as well. Our obstetric and newborn unit shared that their staff really struggled with just-in-time coaching when it came to family visitors visiting, their loved one. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable. And so then, we suggested scripting, just having a standard script that you can provide your teams and they can just, memorize that script and read it off to the visitors. And it makes it a little bit less awkward for them. And having a standardized script means that every single employee was giving the same message to those visitors. We also disseminated minutes to include senior leadership as well, so that they're aware of what units are struggling with. And in those weekly calls, we also challenged the managers with a 5 to 10 minute manageable task, right? Action items, whether it's assigning a hand hygiene champion or saying at huddle, just ask one hand hygiene question to your staff. It's just something manageable that doesn't take them away from their other responsibilities as well. So hand hygiene efforts is a really good way to actually engage your frontline staff and their creative side too. If you walk through any of our units, you're going to see a bunch of creative posters and signage along the hallways reminding people to clean their hands before and after they leave the room. Our surgery ICU manager, Peggy, she actually has she dressed up her dog, her Chihuahua, as a hand hygiene sheriff. And so her dog is posted around in this really cute little outfits to remind people to clean their paws. But I will say that signs alone will not improve your hand hygiene compliance. Over time, that signage just falls into the background, just like alarm fatigue, right? It just becomes, just kind of just goes away. It's really important to put other initiatives as well in addition to the hand hygiene signs that you see. We've done bigger house-wide campaigns to raise awareness, not just amongst nursing teams, but providers, anyone really that's on your unit. And so one Halloween, we did a campaign called What's Brewing Beneath Your Nails? And we had a cart that we would push around, and we would ask, doctors, nurses, EVS, linens, food services, anyone to culture their hands, and we asked them when the last time they cleaned their hands was. And so then we incubated those plates. You can see how gross they are. And then actually the healthcare workers, we assign them a number so they actually go back onto our intranet and look up their own number, look up their own hands to see what their hands grew. It's just a really great starting point for education, when you're on a unit talking to people. We had staff that cleaned their hands for 10 minutes after they left the patient room and just sat at the nursing station, and all they touched was their cell phone. I believe that's actually the one that's the bottom row, second one from your left. That right there, that one was 15 minutes, sorry. I remember that really clearly because I was so grossed out by that. All she did was just leave her room and was sat, and I saw her on her phone scrolling, and we cultured her hand, and it's growing E. coli and Pseudomonas, really mucoides Pseudomonas. And so it's a great conversation piece to start up and say, this is what's on your hand, this is why it's so important to clean your hands before you enter those rooms, before you touch patients, because the environment is really dirty. This was a really fun campaign, and our staff really enjoyed it. So just-in-time coaching, it really is the silver bullet. It's a must if you want to be successful. It is very awkward, and it's hard for everyone, even for us, our IPs. I will never forget my worst just-in-time coaching event. I still cringe when I think about it today. I'm getting anxious just thinking about it right now. I used to cover the neonatal ICU. And I was rounding, did my normal rounds, and there were 15 doctors rounding that day, 15, just attending, resident, fellows, med students. And the attending walked in without cleaning her hands, and then of course the rest followed suit. A couple did hand hygiene, but not nowhere near close to the 15 total. And so I waited, until they came out, and I addressed it, and I said to her, hey, next time don't forget to clean your hands. And I did it as friendly as I could, but she wasn't having it. She got really super defensive, and almost kind of admonishing, saying, well, I didn't touch the patient, and I just stood there. And I was, and of course now, I'm short, I'm under 5 feet. There's 15 people, they're all taller than me. I already feel like a child. It's a very uncomfortable situation, right? But I responded, that there's a potential to contaminate patient space even if you don't touch the patient, because you go in there, you lean in against the counter, you put your hand and rest it on the bed rails, So she took that, and then of course she asked me for data because she didn't believe the system, and doctors love asking for data. I don't know about what your experience is, but for us, it's does CHG really work? Yes, it really works. Where's the data? Here's the data. And so, I de-escalated, redirecting that focus again back to patient safety and employee safety. And of course, to address her requests, I also pointed her to our many publications on how we validated our system as well. But just-in-time coaching doesn't have to be this long, drawn-out sermon. If it's a healthcare worker, they know that hand hygiene is a cornerstone of infection prevention, right? And so it could just be a quick, friendly reminder, and hopefully that person just receives it well. That day, though, I learned how hard it must be for our nurses, who are there day in and day out seeing this and what they can do. And so I started thinking more about what I can do to help support our teams. Because it must be hard, because nurses contribute 75% of our entries and exits, so they really own that hand hygiene rate that's on their unit. And it must be hard to watch other people visitors come on, and erode the hard work that they've done all day long, right? So I thought about ways that we can make it more bearable, which is scripting, and modeling that behavior, really calling upon yourself when you're on those units to model that behavior. You can't let a single incident go. Any missed just-in-time coaching event really does a disservice to your patients and to your frontline teams who need to feel your support also. We have managers that create scripting for nurses, and one of my favorites from Peggy, the person who had the Chihuahua. She says, clean your hands on your way in to protect your patients, clean your hands on your way out to protect yourselves. And I love that. It's just so clear. Successful units that have leaders like Peggy, they really who have committed themselves to hand hygiene, and believe in the system, and model that behavior for staff, their staff will follow suit. So it's important to find an engaged leader or find a way to engage your leader. And it's not just nursing who have just-in-time coaching opportunities, right? Anyone can do it. And so on our calls, we've suggested that having the secretaries page out on their units when the hand hygiene rates, dip, as a reminder to all the frontline staff. Or they'll also, some units have created these strategies where the secretary will stop these giant numbers of rounds coming in at the doorway and say, hey, don't forget the hand hygiene, and then demonstrate hand hygiene as well. So they have that there when they're taking into their units with them. Excuse me. And of course, we always say on our calls, and even when we're rounding and we're speaking with staff, if there are ever any unprofessional responses just-in-time coaching, we tell them to escalate that, right? Not to address it, not to address the missed hand hygiene event, but to address the lack of professionalism, really, because that really breeds a culture that's not safe, and we want to really fix that first, because that falls in line with hand hygiene too, and your other metrics that you may have. We also make ourselves available to anyone who may be uncomfortable escalating those things, and so that we'll follow up with that for them, just so that they feel supported through those things as well, right? So it can be really difficult for our providers to join our weekly hand hygiene calls. The schedule may not work for them. And so we've attended service line meetings, met the providers when they have time, just to educate on the system, show our data for our validation, and answer questions. And that really helped get their buy-in and believe that in the system's accuracy as well. And these opportunities are just a great way to get the providers, to providers and just impress upon them how important it is that hand hygiene is really imperative to all healthcare workers. We also ask them to make a commitment to model that behavior for their peers. We have a plastics surgeon who single-handedly affected hand hygiene rates whenever he was rounding on the units. And you can actually see this here on this line graph. He cleaned his hands every single time, all those 5 moments of hand hygiene, he did them all. But he never said a word about it. He just did it. And his team saw that, right? And they, of course, then followed that behavior and also did the same thing. And we can tell, our data, corroborates with when he shows up on round. We can tell what time he comes on. Of course, there is an ugly side to hand hygiene, changing hand hygiene habits, and it's gaming of our system. When there's a lot of pressure, from above, it can kind of push some individuals to cheat. And so whenever we see rates spike, we will go in, spike higher than usual than the people baselines. We'll actually go in and investigate the raw data and look at what's going on, try to piece together what happened. This actually happened a few months ago on one of our units. We noticed that the 2 rooms on our units had some unusual activity, right? We saw that there were no entries and exits, 0, for a couple weeks, but there was tons of hand hygiene activations. So we went to the room and we found that someone had covered up the sensors, our entrance and exit sensors, with mask. Someone had to climb up on a counter and do this. Even if I climb on a counter, I still can't reach it. So someone tall did this. But that's just unacceptable, right? I mean, you are probably all shocked, and we were also really shocked as well at how far someone could take this. And we can get a lot of information from our raw data from our electronic monitoring system. We can see when people are gaming, this is what we call touring, where they'll walk down a hallway and activate every single dispenser, down the hall, room 1, room 2, room 3, and we'll see timestamps, right? And those rooms just in succession. Because the raw data gives us a time frame when things happen, and then we can actually go back into our camera footage and see the person who did this and see them walking down the hallway. And so it's very just it's not fun to see it, right? But the data is actually really helpful to be able to find these things. Or we'll see people just activating dispensers 10 times in a row at 3 a.m. when you're not even entering a room, right? And that's clear cheating. And so we've had data that kind of helps us pinpoint when these events happen, so that we can kind of go in and investigate them. And with direct observations, you're just not going to catch that, right? Like no one's going to outright cheat in front of you. And so with our electronic monitoring system, we've kind of had that opportunity to see this kind of behavior too. And of course, we've actually follow up with every single one of these instances and report them as safety events. You know, we see our electronic monitoring system as like a safety system, and tampering with this system that measures hand hygiene is really tampering with a device that gives you information on how safe of a care our patients are receiving. And so we take it very seriously. System gaming is an unfortunate event, right? An element of improving hand hygiene. But I'm happy to say that in our 10 years, we did not see very many instances of gaming. Probably towards the beginning of our journey, we saw a little bit more. But I would say that it's not a lot. People don't come to work and say, I'm going to purposely do bad things today. They come to work and they show up wanting to do the right thing. But in the beginning, there were some more instances of gaming. Or we'll see it when like a new employee shows up to the organization and they haven't been acclimated to the environment and the culture of the unit yet. But addressing these gaming is really important, right? It's giving you an opportunity to address the staff with those behaviors, and also letting you have the opportunity to redirect their focus and offer them the proper ways of improving hand hygiene compliance. And when people think about hand hygiene compliance and improving it, people mostly focus on improving their numerator, increasing the number of hand hygiene activations or their events. But really, you need to focus on both things, the numerator and the denominator, focusing also on the entries and exits. We saw a really good example of how mindfulness of our entries and exits can really impact our hand hygiene compliance. So we were averaging about 54.5% pre-COVID. During the height of the pandemic, we saw daily peaks of as high as 92 to 100% on some units. And how do we get that? Well, one, people were really scared and cleaned their hands like crazy. But the second thing also is that our staff became very, very thoughtful about their entries and exits. This is a time when we had to conserve PPE to not go through our supply. And so that mindfulness was in the top of their brains. And staff were asking themselves, do I have everything I need before I walk into this room? Do I have all of my lab specimens, the tubes I need to do my labs? Do I have all the blankets that this patient may ask for, right? And they would bundle all of these things so that they could just limit their entries and exits to just only necessary entries and exits. And so while we saw increases in hand hygiene compliance across our institution, the most dramatic increases were seen on our COVID cohort units, where that team is laser focused on PPE conservation and entries and exits. Another way that our staff stays focused on hand hygiene is through our real-time feedback monitors, which is we have these monitors on every nursing station in every single one of our units. And it shows real-time data of how their hand hygiene compliance is for that specific unit, right? We love this. She can customize our displays, but it shows the current performance and also a trend, like a look back over the last 7 days and the last 30 days. Because hand hygiene, when you're working on improving hand hygiene, can really be demoralizing if there's a bad day. So if you have a strong performing unit who just had a really bad day, if they only see the current rate, it can really just discourage them, right? And so having the numbers and remind them of the bigger picture, their journey, the last 30 days, the last 6 months can be very encouraging for them to know this is just a bad day, I can start again. And we always tell people, hand hygiene, with every single time you have an opportunity, it's a fresh start. It's not like, where you have to wait till the next day to start something. You can literally start again all over again in this next moment with your next hand hygiene activation. And the reverse is true. So for units that may not be as strong in their compliance, they can see they haven't been doing so well in the last 6 months, last 30 days, and then really work on getting that hand hygiene compliance back up. We didn't think that people actually cared about our monitors. We just thought they were fading in the background like signs, but they actually use it. So our monitors all went down a couple of years ago, and the uproar that we heard from staff, like all these calls came in saying, our monitors don't work, like we need them back up. And it was just incredible to see how useful people found this real-time data to be. Because it turns out that when the rates do drop, the unit secretaries are paging staff and hey, we're below our goal, make sure that you focus on hand hygiene, right? And they're using this tool. And so when you put tools in readily accessible places and show people that the data is true and accurate, they will use it and continue that work of hand hygiene improvement. And that kind of takes a little bit of the burden off of the IP as well. So I've talked a little bit about the different things that we've done, but there's not a one-size-fits-all for hand hygiene improvement. What we do know does work is that you have to throw a lot of things out there and try everything, and to give it time to take effect, right? If you're studying it like once a week, you may not see those changes right away, but over time, you'll be able to see some changes. So this is a 37-week look back of one of our ICs when we started at 32% with the install. And over as each week climbs on, they introduce new initiatives, like just like signage, right? And then just-in-time coaching, and then assigning specific people to be just-in-time coaches, because when you just say, hey, be a hand hygiene champion, you don't know who's actually going to do it. So having someone assigned to was really impactful. They ran contests between night shift and day shift, because our data can compare those two different things as well. They started, rewarding people who did a really good job as a hand hygiene champion, and over that time, we saw that it was really effective. And by I think 8 months, this unit reached 80%. Now, the previous slide showed you what an engaged leader looks like, what an engaged staff looks like. But you're going to have people who don't prioritize hand hygiene. They have a lot of competing priorities, right? Falls, bed sores, et cetera. And so not a lot of effort is being put into hand hygiene. And so this unit here only did 3 things, and it shows. They barely had any increases in their hand hygiene compliance. So as IPs, really need to focus on figure out how to motivate these leaders to motivate their teams. And when I see something like this, when I see a unit that's kind of like this, I follow up with that manager. I round with them. Very low stakes round. It's only focused on hand hygiene. I don't go, hey, your sharps is overfilled. I don't go, hey, it's only hand hygiene, right? And I'm walking around and talking to staff. And staff will come up to you when they see you, and they'll ask questions about the data, about the system. It's not real. I don't think it's capturing me. I clean my hands. It's everybody else. And so these are those moments when you have an opportunity to model appropriate responses and encouraging responses to that manager, who can then take that information back when they're doing their own rounds to encourage their teams as well. A lot of times a manager is not engaged because they don't care. It's because they don't know how to be engaged, and they don't know enough about hand hygiene perhaps, and all the little intricacies that come into hand hygiene improvement. And so when you join them and just show them how to do it, they can take that with them, on their own time as well. And it also just makes them feel supported, which is, I think, what a lot of people need right now, just to feel supported. Because a lot of times managers just are alone in their initiatives, right? And so having that backup from the IP is really important. Switching gears a little bit, leapfrog, surveyors. A reasonable concern about having hand hygiene rates displayed or reporting them, whether it's an issue or not for surveyors at leapfrog. And the answer is really no. They don't actually really care about the actual numbers, except for US News and World Reports. For the pediatric section, that section they do actually care about the number, and you get points if you score a little bit higher on your hand hygiene compliance. But for others, the actual number doesn't matter as much. They want to see what you're doing with that data. And we've actually had really positive responses from our surveys. When we show where we started and all the different initiatives that we're putting in place and how our hand hygiene has increased over the years. And so they find that they're much more valuable. I must say though, even though they may not care about the actual numbers, if they do see a large number of people not cleaning their hands, they will cite you on that, and so just keep that in mind. That's a really important piece during surveys. So I'll end my section here with the biggest surprise that we've learned in our hand hygiene journey, and it's that hand hygiene reflects the culture, the morale, the health of your unit. Good leaders who are able to engage their staff and build camaraderie, have units with strong hand hygiene compliance. And it's not only reflecting their numbers. We see them have success in other metrics as well, collapses, other things as well. It's because this unit have employees that are moving as a unit, as a singular team with one goal in mind. Units with poor compliance, we know that things are wrong on the unit and they have like poor teamwork, interpersonnel issues, and they have oftentimes their other metrics are also failing as well. And so our electronic data has actually given us like an idea, an insight on like the health of the system, of the unit. When we see low dips, we see that there's actually a code on a unit, right? And those deaths, those codes, they take a mental and emotional toll on our teams that tanks hand hygiene for that shift. And so what our managers have done instead now is when they have a debrief after the codes to just help the staff get back to a better mindset. The impact, we have to emphasize the impact of having an electronic monitoring system and the value that's there for us. It's really a tool that saves money. Rachel mentioned it a little bit earlier. The increase in hand hygiene and reduction in acquisition of MRSA and C. diff. Of course, we're not improving hand hygiene for financial reasons, right? The ultimate goal here, for all of us, I'm sure, is that we improve hand hygiene because it improves patient safety and it improves the quality of care and improves employee safety. It prevents harm. But preventing harm while saving money is not a bad thing, doesn't hurt. And so for some people within the organization, like your C-suite, that can be a very valuable piece of information to know. So wow, that was a lot. As I was preparing for this day and looking at what we've done these last 10 years, I'm like, we've done actually quite a bit. And in reflecting on like all of our failures and our successes, we realized that we've done just so much. But and failure is okay. Like you're going to fail because there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that too. We've learned so much from all of our failures on our way to success. And so we have some upcoming plans actually for new ideas moving forward, which includes individual accountability. And Rachel will share with you what our future looks like at UCM.
What's next for us? So as Vera shared, it's a lot of work. It seems like a lot of never-ending work, but we can't recommend enough how powerful of a tool an automated system is. But recognize it has its limitations. It's not going to change habits or behaviors. There's going to be a ton of work that goes into it post implementation. It's been a challenging few years, and what we've really realized is those strong units, those strong teams have really maintained and improved hand hygiene, but some people are really still struggling. They've had more staff turnover, layoffs, things like that, and they're still really struggling with hand hygiene, and that's why we want to look into individual accountability. We're going to be able to help some of the units and areas and individuals that still are really struggling and still 10 years in are saying it's not me, it's everyone else that's not washing their hands, because there's still going to be some resistance and you're still going to have those people, and having that data by individual and roles is really going to help. Another great thing about individual monitoring is you can do contact tracing, but as Vera explained, you definitely want to validate the technology. And if you're going to go to an individual monitoring system, you want to make sure that that system is capturing correctly and tying it to the correct individual. You can't install a system and not make sure that it's counting correctly. And really the last thing is you don't want the data to be seen as punitive. You want it to be seen as coaching and opportunities, and try to keep it positive. You're gonna get resistance to automated hand hygiene monitoring. You're definitely gonna get more resistance to automated hand hygiene monitoring by those that struggle with hand hygiene. They're gonna be the loudest voices, they're gonna be the most cautious, and so making sure the system works well is important. They're probably gonna act that way because it's gonna be difficult. They're gonna have to change some behaviors. But it's really important that you have those for those sort of resistant users. And you're also gonna have people that can be your positive role models, that some people don't mind individual technology at all because they wash their hands, they don't find it cumbersome, reminders or things like that. And so that wraps it up for today for us. We want to thank Dr. Landon, we want to thank GOJO for the opportunity to share our experiences and lessons learned. And then we want to allow for questions if anyone has them, and I'll flash up that QR code again.
Thank you so much. Okay. I don't know. Okay, I think the microphone's on now. Thank you so much. So this QR code is what will get you your CE certificate. You just open the camera on your phone, and then you'll see a link come up. So you click on the link, and then you fill out the SurveyMonkey. And then, as I said before, we'll follow up with a copy of the slides. But Vera and Rachel, thank you so much. And at this point, they'd love to answer your questions, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I had 2 questions for you. We have a lot of private providers at our facility. So how do you get their buy-in? Like, did you work it into, like, so if you had to wear a badge, did you work it into their contracts at all?
Well, that's a good question. We haven't installed an individual system beyond a trial at this point, but that's something we would consider, is to work it into their contract for sure.
Okay, and then how did you handle, did you have any open bay settings or even any operating rooms? And if you had any operating rooms, how did you handle the scrub?
Yeah, so we haven't actually installed the group-based monitoring in our areas with open bays, like our neonatal ICU has open bays. And that's why we're looking for individual technology to hopefully help with that sort of setting. And the same thing, we're still doing direct observations in our peri-op procedural areas and emergency departments, just because the workflow is different and the group-based monitoring that we have isn't as accurate as we would want for those settings.
Thank you for your presentation. My question for you is, how did you guys determine who would be wearing badges, and how often would they need to swap out with a different discipline?
So for the system that we trialed, everyone was encouraged. It wasn't mandatory that they had to wear badges. And also, the way the technology worked is you actually had to charge the badge overnight. So you had to pick up a badge and return a badge at the end of your shift. I think that was definitely a barrier for some and a discourager. So having a badge-based system that you don't have to charge that badge overnight is a benefit. Also, with those badge-based systems that you charge overnight, you also don't get the real-time data. You don't get it until they go and charge that badge.
And then a follow-up question, and maybe this is because you did group monitoring. If you were to do individual monitoring, how would you determine what discipline you were assigning to each badge?
So the way most systems work is you actually register the badge to the person's ID, and so you can tell which discipline has that ID. Does that answer that?
Good morning. Thank you for sharing your journey. I have a question. How long did it take for validation? I actually have 2 questions. So.
Sorry,
Are you still validating?
No, we're done. Sorry, I just laugh because I think of all the memories. It's a long time because we spent thousands of hours at the beginning when we, and so it's not, we didn't just install in every single across the hospital, right? In every unit, like we start with a couple and then you start expanding, and so, but with each unit, it does take time to validate that unit. So I would say, like for us, for a unit. For planned path, it's pretty quick. Like maybe if you can get into the unit without having patients in there, it's an empty unit, just walking in and out, perfect conditions, about 2 hours max. But the behavioral validation takes much longer because you need to get those numbers of observations in to a certain sample size to ensure that your data is actually accurate and significant as well. And so that can depend, but we sometimes for a per unit have spent about a month just trying to collect data because you have other things to do too. You just can't spend the whole 8 hours on a unit watching people every single minute, right? And so that can take about a month.
Okay. And then you mentioned, well, you didn't, I think the first speaker mentioned that you needed additional resources. Is that just more staff to kind of help you validate? What resources did you need?
Yes, more research to staff because the validation part does require in-person observations. And so we've been fortunate to actually have light duty staff come in and work with us. And so we've taught them how to do observations. We also make sure that they actually did them correctly and then send them out there with us and to other units while we're on other units. And so there's multiple people collecting data at the same time as well to help us get those numbers of observations in.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My question is, how do you account the soap and water hand hygiene into your monitoring system then?
Our soap dispensers have a sensor inside, and so every time it's activated, it records as an activation. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you for your presentation. So on gaming the system, did you ever find that tall person, and do you hold them accountable?
You want to do that?
We tried. We have we have video in the hallway, but we don't have videos in the room for many reasons. And so it was difficult to figure out the person. The system is nice because it allowed us to tell when it was covered up, and we could really narrow it down to a couple different individuals. And then our senior leadership really took it very seriously and let us present at senior sort of quality and patient safety meetings where we got to talk about the event and how this should never happen. And it really, while that individual didn't get disciplined, it really got a lot of press, and it's very unlikely someone will be doing it again.
Thank you so much for coming. I know people have to get to the opening plenary. Vera and Rachel will be up here for a few more minutes if you'd like to ask additional questions. But thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it.